Thanks everyone for being here. And I can see by the list of names, many of you are friends. So you can't see this room, but basically we're in a Star Trek hologram, and it looks like we're about to take off to a different galaxy. So from what I understand, the OECD metaphor is bird's eye view, big picture, and try to get as many perspectives as possible. There's actually windows everywhere here. So I want to take you through an interactive session, and as always, it's not moving. That's okay. That's how it's supposed to be. Fantastic. So the framework for CLA is within the Six Pillars approach, future studies. You can use CLA as its own method, or you can use this as part of a larger anticipation program. Today, we're focused on CLA as its own method. Now, many people ask, well, when do we use CLA? Often, I would get a leader and to say, well, the people in my organization don't understand the worldviews of others. Use CLA. The people in my organization are stuck in the present. They're doing good work, but their lived experience is golden handcuffs. I said, well, work with them to change the narrative. So CLA really works well when you're on a journey and kind of stuck, or you need to understand the views of others. I was working with a large bank recently, and the head of international capital markets, she said to me, look, we've done the two-day CLA workshop. We have 5 new projects going, but now I need to present to the international board. What do you recommend? And I told her, well, what's your story here? What's your metaphor of yourself in this process? Are you mindful of your narrative and who you are in this intervention? So that's the first thing she did. So her story was almost the convener who brings all the tribes together. I said, great. So now you have a story, you know who you are. As you start on your project on the future of international capital markets, do you know the stories of your board members? She goes, actually, I don't. So I said, now start to figure out how they construct reality. She came back, she goes, I see board member 1 is a quant expert. So I said, make sure you present your proposal in language he understands. Board number 2 is a big philosopher. He only likes it when you discuss world philosophy. So make sure you do that. Board number 3 is actually a storyteller, tells some stories. So what came out of that, before you make the systemic change, you pitch your project, understand your own story, and make sure you understand the stories of others. So those of you who want more details, there's 3 CLA books each. Unfortunately, in this world, 600 pages long, but there's short 1-minute videos we're working on. So if you don't like to read, watch the videos. If you're new to CLA, the simple hypothesis is 4 levels of analysis: the litany, the data, the headlines. This is the official view of what counts as reality. But if you're a social scientist, you know fully well, if you're a historian, behind the official view, the data are always systemic causes, be they political, economic, historical. That's level 2 analysis, the why. Level 3 analysis is a philosophical. Behind any systemic view is always a worldview, a way of seeing time, gender, space. Understand that, and at the core, of course, is the deepest, is the myth and metaphor, the unconscious meaning we bring to reality. When I first developed CLA at a meeting in Bangkok, it started out too much traffic congestion. Why? Too many cars. Why? Well, we have a worldview that economies work better when you're centralized. And then finally, what's the metaphor? The metaphor was basically West is best. We must make designer city like Los Angeles. So this straight away got him to seeing, understanding, here's a way to understand reality. I am having trouble with the clicker. It doesn't seem to, there we go. So and the way I'm trying to pose this to you, if you're a quant person, you're going to say data is real. If you're a metaphor person who lives in stories, you're going to say, actually, the imagined is real because it frames mind, it frames data. So the suggestion here is your view of reality helps explain and understand where you sit in terms of positionality on how you see social change. My own take is myth and metaphors have the deepest change. There's the civilization stories of what we value. The shorter term change, of course, data, what we measure. If we look at the 4 levels, you can start to see there's an issue, there's a solution, who's responsible? and what's the source. So this gives you a quick map of where to and how to apply CLA. The main thing is go deeper and also go wide. Now, there's a debate in CLA circles. Is it an iceberg? Yes, it is. We're in Paris right now, so I'm sure all my Parisian friends at OECD will say it's a gâteau, it's a cake, enjoy every level. When we're working with SPC, Pacific Community, and NUMIA, they say, well, no, we reject the iceberg model. I said, why? Well, there's no icebergs here. So, okay, fair enough. So what's the better narrative, a CLA of the CLA? They said it's an island. The top are the trees. Underneath, below are it's the reefs. And below, you go deeper, deeper. So the idea is, again, use CLA, but of course, don't be used by it. If you forget everything, remember the goal is to link metaphor with system. Both are interactive. Many years ago with Brisbane City Council, they said, right now we're hierarchical. We're like a large whale, hard to move, one brain. What's better? They said, let's become a school of fish. And what does that mean? We're networked. So the metaphor changes the system. If you know Drucker's work, he's alleged to have said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. True. But our role as change makers, as futurists, those who wish for another world and who believe at the value level another world is possible, wish to argue culture can also elevate and transform strategy. So let me start with an example. 15 years ago, with a large educational system and organization, we were working on the future of education, and their vision was beautiful. Tech, students listening to other students around the world. So tech enables student learning. And so then when we did the report, the minister got the report and removed 58 pages of the report and just kept one page. And I queried, why is that the case? Then I remember during the workshop, when I asked these educational leaders, I understand your vision, your strategy, but what's your metaphor of who you are? And you'll recognize this because many organizations share this metaphor. They say, we're in a castle like Camelot. The king is the minister, queen is the DG. We're around a round table of principles, but around us are wolves. The wolves can be many. In their case, it was parents, teachers, students, media. Amazing vision, but a lived story of high risk. So certainly in this approach, they did not think they could be successful. Thus, as you'll see anywhere, if you're a Foresight practitioner, funding for Foresight is there, implementation is not. Now, why is there no implementation? Because the risk equation suggests that the risks are high. So what do? Well, we want to work with them to change the story. So let me just ask you, what's the better story here? In your chat box, if they're living in a world castle surrounded by hungry wolves, what would you recommend is a different story that allows them to innovate, to transform? So just write in the chat box, what would you see would be better? I'm happy to wait for comments there. Anyone? What's a better narrative than a castle surrounded by hungry wolves? Okay, there's one person in the chat. If you can read that or let me see it. Thank you. Wolves protecting the castle, orchestra, a playground. So you can see if it's a playground, then we have to transform education into more playful. Wildlife tamers, feed the wolves, make them your friends, a zoo, coach and team. So obviously you folks know futures because you've come up with 7 great ideas, how to transform it. So you want, and each one of these transformations has a real life systemic change. If it's a playground, then learning is not rote, text-based, it's community peer-to-peer learning, and you have to change the castle. Now, those of you know I spent a lot of time working with law enforcement. At our meeting in Hague many years ago, I asked senior police leaders, what's the better story? They said, it's easy. Find the junior detective, send him out to find the head of the wolf pack, and kill him. That resolves the issue of risk. Now, does it? So in one way, of course, now you've eliminated the wolf, but the goal of the workshop, the project, was creating harmony among law enforcement nations in terms of reducing the problems of jurisdiction. So if you're out there killing your friends, of course it's not going to work because all you see is risk everywhere. So that's, you've done really well there. Thanks so much for your suggestions. Let me go on to the next slide then. Now, this example I use many places when we looked at emerging issues. Remember, CLA in the context of foresight is what's changing the world. Many years ago in Australian Farming Futures meeting, we asked, at the rise of cellular agriculture, in vitro meat, veganism, vegetarianism, what should be your recommendation to these changes in diet? Recommendation 1 was kill the vegans. Recommendation 2 was kill the scientist. And recommendation 3 was kill the inner city coffee drinkers. I asked them, why do you want to kill inner city coffee drinkers? They said, we're very well aware social change happens among inner city coffee drinkers. If we can eliminate them, we can stop change. So, of course, the ministerial staff was, oh, this is not the outcome you promised us. We're looking for a win-win solution, not a landscape of mass death. So then later in another city, when we were looking at the future of meat production in Australia, we were ready for this. Given there's resistance, how do we work with these strategies that counter resistance? And these were some of the things that they came up with. I'll just do this now. Okay, so the resistance was, if you're killing the vegans, maybe as a farmer, you can see how they can be allies, organics. If you're killing scientists, the CEO of Roma, Queensland, she said, aha, instead of killing the scientists, shouldn't every farmer become a scientist? Shouldn't we be investing in AI for every farmer? How do we up their skills so they have real-time information on pricing, on carbon emissions, on climate change? And finally, instead of killing the coffee drinkers, the early adopters, what's early adoption in where we live? And someone said AI in farming. Someone else said medical cannabis. Someone else said precision farming. So this is taking the points of resistance and moving those to points of solution. So of course, you know that's the core of future studies. It's not every solution has a problem, but every problem has a solution. The role of the foresight practitioner, the futures theorist, is to ensure practices that can lead to transformation. Now, this takes work. If you're working in government, many of you are, one large international project, they funded the transition to renewables, and I think they paid $500,000 for a study on how they could shift. Experimenting in solar energy, looking for how sewage can be used to transform. So these are bite-sized projects. If you went for the big transition, most institutions are nervous, afraid, and there's always someone in the institution who can usually see he'll have no role in the future. So we wanted to find a successful way forward where the resistors could see they can also be part of the transition to renewables. And the projects weren't $100 million projects, $1 million, $10 million. They were bite-sized projects which were doable. So CLA works like that. You start with the data, the litany, the issue. What are the causes? What's the worldview and what's the metaphor? And the examples I've used, the castle surrounded by hungry wolves, Queen Elizabeth, the ship that can't change, and you think, what's a better story? What's the story that gives us freedom to move, to have mobility, to transform and create new strategies? So you do cultural change. What are new systems? And of course, I've learned after 40 years of doing this, until the chief accountant is happy, nothing changes. We count what we count. If you create the new story, but still measuring the past, then what happens is the past reinforces and the foresight project dies a death of 1 million data points. So here it is in theory and practice. Change the story, link to system, remeasure the desired future, understand the worldviews of your stakeholders. Use CLA to audit every project. With one large international bank, they funded an innovation center in one country. One of my students who took a CLA course said, okay, we have now a huge amount of money to create an innovation education center in the bank. It was a Federal Reserve Bank. He said, before we send the money, let me ask you a very simple question. What's your metaphor of education? And they said, oh, it's easy. It's who you know, not what you know. And he said, aha, so let's return the money because it's not going to work. If it's who you know, not what you know, then innovation and education won't work. So this is why we want to understand the narrative, CLA as an audit. And now again, CLA, you can start from yourself. He asked them one simple question: can we transform? Conclusion was no, but it's important to see it from multiple perspectives. I start out with the example of international banking. Here's again what with one bank. Their view was they're out there to support the economy. They feel they're heroes. They go home and they tell their children, I'm a hero. Customers see them as fat cats. Regulators don't like bankers. They're risk takers. Government only wants the money. Given these multiple perspectives, what's the narrative we can use that understands us and actually helps us transform? So CLA works at a deep level. This can be very challenging. With one law enforcement organization, they were wondering why their cybersecurity policy was failing. And their conclusion was because we believe we know best, better than everyone. So his goal was, how do I understand the worldviews of my stakeholders? By understanding their metaphors, things like, well, cybercrime is a fairy tale. Why should I care? I won't give you data. See no evil, hear no evil, use the internet. Then he said, aha, my cybercrime strategy is based on my own worldview, based on the stakeholders in my office. I've now developed a national crime strategy. For that, I need to understand their worldviews. I called him back a year later, and he had left the office. Why? Because the metaphor of his own organization overwhelmed his strategy. Culture ate strategy for breakfast. So we're always trying to find ways to change. So this is the kind of, in plain language, easy CLA. Now, some of you were theoreticians. There's always one person in the room who said, great, I understand it, but I really don't care. Tell me the theory, tell me the context. So let me be pretty simple here. One CLA is based on the four traditions of theory. Empirical, quantitative forecasting, how many unemployed will we have given the rise of AI? Interpretive, what do you mean by unemployment? What's your lived experience of unemployment? Is that fearful, or is there funding for you to find a new job, or will new jobs be created? Critical, what's missing here? Why are we linking AI with jobs? What would a world of post-jobs look like? What's the world of purpose and meaning? And action learning, given the rise of AI in our country, in our organization, what are some real research projects we can do? So CLA done well takes the four traditions of social science, science, philosophy, and learning by doing, and links them. If you're a futurist, you've always been asked, I don't want to learn. CLA looks like work. Can you just tell me the answer? Just tell me the answer. And again, our main journey here, no, it's a learning journey. It's a learning context. Our role as futurists is not to give the answer because that assumes we know. In my 40 years, I've consistently found out that I don't know, and I hope you're having the same experience, but we know how to learn and how to unlearn. So stage one is zero learning. We give information and evidence to a prime minister, and they don't understand it. They double down to what we don't know. Stage two, they said, very cool, fantastic. Give me the 3 points so I can make my 5-year plan. And we know in our world, the 5-year plan will be obsolete in 3 months. So we go to double loop, learning by learning, the deep questioning. Is it really about cars, or is it about mobility? Is it really about selling bigger SUVs, or do I transform the architecture of every city to say the purpose of selling cars is mobility and creating a cleaner, greener, pollution-free world? And this goes back to the deepest part of Foresight and CLA. I changed my story from I can't do it, I'm handcuffed, to I can make a difference. I remember one senior economist with one international agency, and we did the 2-day course, and he was thrilled. He said, can I ask you a personal question? I said, sure. He said, I come up with these brilliant proposals. I said, fantastic for you. He goes, the president never listens to any of them. So I said, so what's your metaphor? He goes, I'm the man of the golden handcuffs. Every time I have a proposal, they never implement, but they keep on raising my salary. So now he's in a situation where he has handcuffs and it's golden. What does he do? So then he changed his metaphor to the Midas touch, meaning instead of expecting them to implement, why don't you test out your theories in the real world? And now everything you touch turns to gold because you're making a difference. So CLA starts out with a story that's frozen to a story that's active, to an iceberg, to a stream. And why does that work? Because once we're active, we're engaged, there's relief. We're actually now moving from the study of the future to creating the future. We had one project, and this was very interesting for me because as we do a lot of reports, many of us live in the world of reports. We take data, we take workshop, and we say, here's the solution. And so one brilliant UN SCAP meeting, they said, actually, the problem is the report is seen as the final answer. The report is part of the ivory tower of brilliant experts. What we need to become is the mother tree of knowledge, not the ivory tower, the mother tree of knowledge. What does that mean? Reports at high quality, smarter, multiple formats, and critically, the democratization of knowledge, meaning spread them out. And finally, the view was we're knowledge on demand. So this was deconstructing the notion as the report as the final solution to the report of the beginning as an engaged process of transformation. So this is what we're saying, what don't I know? Go outside learning. If we do this well, we get transformation. In this case, we help a company move from selling insurance to actually the future is bioinformatics, wearables. Why? Because we want a safer country, safer roads. And this now goes to the level 4 narrative learning. So let me now go back to you. It's a question I used for many years. One head of Olympic swimming, he said, I succeed by making sure my country wins gold medals. My metaphor is the golden second, because the last second is what every Olympian trains for 4 years. I said, that's a brilliant metaphor. You're doing well. He goes, yes, but I'm a coach. I'm not concerned just about winning. After the pool, too many become alcoholics, drug users, spouse abusers. So then the issue was, what's the better metaphor? So let me go to chat again. I'm doing this to get you to start to think of strategy as narrative-based. So I said, what's the better metaphor instead of just the golden second? So if you can write some of your suggestions. If you've been to one of these before, you kind of know their answer. Golden second ensures gold medals, but it fails at part 2, which is, well, my Olympians leave as alcoholics, drug users, spouse abusers. And he said, well, maybe it's something about me. I trained them of the worldview of hyper competition. The system is my strategy of practice 24 hours a day, and my litany is the gold medal. What's a better story that gets me to rethink that? Anyone? Yeah, golden life. Stephen is on top. Olympians for life. So you remember there are Olympians, you're part of international team. Lifelong climb. So your teamwork. So you're saying it's not just me, my team is my family. My team is my healthy country. That's why I'm not going to sell illegal, illicit drugs. So what this head of Olympian swimming, he finally came on. I'll click again because he said, of course, what Steve Lichtier said, the golden life. Now here, it's not just the narrative shift. What does that mean in the real world? That means I'm teaching life skills, emotional intelligence, and financial literacy. So this is story leads to strategy change. Now, Rafal, who's sitting by me, we met in Morocco, and we were on the same lunch table. And normally I thought he's OECD, he's, and he spent the lunch asking questions. I said, this guy is from a different planet. My normal expectation when I meet important people is they just want to lecture during lunchtime. And he asked us all for 20 minutes questions about futures. And I thought, this is quite stunning. And I remember the head of Microsoft. They said, how did you transform your company from boring, low value to high value? Pre-COVID, 80 billion. He said, I did one thing. I told HR, don't hire know-it-alls. Hire learners who are curious. One simple narrative shift leads to a dramatic change in the litany, meaning value in the markets. So this is how futures works, and it works personally. In Dubai recently, one commander, he was slouched, burdened. And when we ran the CLA of the self, I said, what's going on? He goes, I'm a commander in the forces. I have my family to take care of. I have to keep the country safe. And now I have a PhD possibility in a different country. I said, so what do you feel like? He goes, oh, I'm a donkey carrying bricks. And no one in the room believed it because we all have such high respect for him, He's no, I'm a donkey. And this is going to end with me having a broken back. He could already anticipate his future 5 years from now. So we worked with as a team, what's a better story? And someone said, you're focused on the burden, that's the deficit. Focus on the asset, worldview shift, And the asset shift is you're investing in your future. The bricks are your infrastructure to create your home, your life of the future. And he just stood up suddenly. His back changed, his smile changed. He said, aha, now I know why I'm doing it. If you know Ivana Miloji's work, she talks a lot about Viktor Frankl and logotherapy. You now have purpose where before you had no purpose. It seemed like a burden. So in institutions, this works as well. It's not just persons. And one institutional case study many years ago through General Anita Heisenberg, pros of policing said, let's start to do this in a real way every year. So in 10, 15 years, we'll have trained law enforcement officials, commissioners to be futures oriented so we can rise to Ron Brown's challenge. We are always catching up. Organized crime is always ahead of us. So now they're one step ahead, looking at brain security to neurotech security, spray on smart water, which is forensically marked, moving from Interpol of nations to Earthpol, basically working on policing climate change and connecting all the global security agencies, changing their story, becoming broken network, only nation-based, to Earthpol, collecting the data, aware of the emerging issues, not just reacting. I'm going to skip that there. If you do that well, there's always the HR person. Interesting. How do you change how we hire? They said right now we hire by the ladder model. Years in the force, years in corporation, years in government leads to you being more likely to be hired. Let's change that to the lift. What does the lift mean? Well, yes, we respect hierarchy, we respect age, but we also know a 25-year-old is far more likely to be a cyber expert than a 70-year-old who's not trained on TikTok or on the new bioforensics or brain biosecurity. So you want to change the metaphor of HR. If you've done many projects, it looks good. HR comes in and ensures you can't get the right people. So you need the lift as your way to move up and down quickly. And thus you change internal systems. Start with a new, understand the problem, we're behind. Come up with a better story, Earthpol. Work with HR to change how they hire. And then finally, transform the system and structure of everything you do. We've been working with the Asia Development Bank for many years through Suzanne Roth, Jos Wagner, many colleagues. And over time, they saw that the issue was infrastructure brought them success, but Asia was changing and they needed to do something else. So they started to shift towards climate change, becoming the world's climate bank. And now over time, once they can see that gender is the key variable, whether you're going to be poor or prosperous, they start to now move towards creating gender bonds, and maybe by 2040, the gender bank. The point is, when you go in futures, you're anticipating to change the purpose of the organization so their core narrative shifts as the world shifts. Thus, you're really agile, you're really adaptable, you're really purpose-based instead of just mouthing those words. In the organization, you also change. Our colleague Suzanne Roth, she goes, aha, that means you change the role of the expert. You're now the expert on tap, expert to go, you're available instead of in your office. You're always available to those who have problems as you become a knowledge bank. Now, there's 2 books on this. I recommend you take a look at them. Futures Thinking in Asia and the Pacific, and a new one by Ivana and Roth, Foresight in Action. Quickly, some of you will ask, well, give me the genealogy. It comes from one, the work of Sarkar. Reality is layers. How does the truth serve you? Know what is truth. From the great data, go with what works. Futures isn't a hypothesis. It's an experiment. From Galtung, underneath data, underneath direct violence, structural violence, and epistemological violence, always go deeper. From Foucault, it's not just that we speak English, we English the world, we language the world. The work of scenarios is to distance us so we can see things afresh, we can see things anew. Level 3 of CLA is saying, let's go wide. What does the world look like from worldview 1, worldview 2, worldview 3? This is the critical turn where you change discourses so the world looks differently. You switch from a European view to an Indic, to a cynic, etc., to a feminist, to a Guyane. Now you see the world afresh instead of strategic foresight, which is give me data about the future so I can better compete with others. No, this is about transformation. And that comes from mythology, the work of the great William Irving Thompson, and of course, Joseph Campbell. We are but metaphors. So there's a critical futures toolbox, which I'm skipped today, but now let's start with you. Everyone choose a question, or if you don't have question, we can choose one for you. What's the issue we're working on? Well, someone suggested uh, the challenge of implementing foresight, for example. That's a kind of a litany issue. We can do that if you want as a group, or of your organization, since most of you here work in organizations, write down what's the metaphor of the organization or the issue you're facing. So this is now where you're going to have to work, and I'm going to go get an eggless croissant. That's a joke. I won't work, but probably didn't understand that. That's okay. Wrong metaphor, wrong story. So choose an issue, and we have the chat box open. What's something you want to work on? If you're uncertain, we can suggest one. We met earlier. Okay, one is, of course, someone's going to ask the biggest question, how can we have world peace? How can humanity in the 21st century create world peace? That's great. So let me ask Monica there, what's the current metaphor of that issue? So that's perfect. So we're going to have, there's 100 people there. So each one write down, if my research question is, how can there be humanity when there's no peace? What's the metaphor underneath that? Someone said, what's the role of the OECD? So someone, if you could write down, what's the current metaphor of the OECD? Again, when we did it with UNSCAP in Bangkok, they said we're an ivory tower. We're a brilliant ivory tower. Everyone loves it. It's great, but it's still an ivory tower. So we have two topics and metaphors. Okay. Tiana says, why? Because our metaphors were combatants. Our worldview comes from that it's a clash of civilizations, if you remember his books. How we get at the carousel of a median election. So the metaphor is the carousel. So write those down. Those are really good. Carousel, conflict is inevitable. Inevitable, says Mariam. We're built into our worldview that Darwinian survival of the species, conflict is built in. I think of the work of Elise Bowling and many others. No, conflict is chosen. We can rethink it. So lifeboat in a storm. So we're getting some civilization is built on conflicts. That's the worldview. Domination and dominated is the worldview. So you start with the metaphor. Many of you are already in the process of doing CLA, and we have some fantastic note takers, and you can see there's multiple CLAs. So you thought your work would be easy. It's not going to be. So you need to try to do multiple CLAs on your screen and bring them back up. So we saw one, how can we have humanity with war? The metaphors were combatants. The worldview is Darwinian, and the system is probably nation states. And the litany is number of people killed every year. Sorry, I did that for you very quickly. I apologize. I said I'd take a holiday, but I didn't. So we have some really good ones there. And Adil says, sorry, I don't have my glasses on. It's built into it. So now that's really good. You've gone to level 4 analysis, and some of you have already quickly figured out the metaphor is based on a worldview, whether it's capitalism, Darwinian evolutionism, and then there's systems that actually reinforce that. So now your work as a futurist or interventionist, where do you wish to intervene? Do you change capitalism? Do you change the nation-state worldview? Do you, as David Lloyd did, rewrite Darwin? So this comes back to your CLA of yourself. Who are you in this journey? This is not about anyone else right now. Who are you in this journey? Where do you intervene? So you go, your agency might be, there's nothing I can do. I'm a small frog in a big well, to know I'm going to climb out of the well and speak loudly. So this is part of your journey here. War is politics and it's fascist, yes. So we've done now in peace and war quite good. So let me now go on. Okay, are we the 20th century doctors? Okay, this is not bad. So look how clever that is. I can't see who posted that. Right now, the issue was, how do we have impact? The metaphor was basically economistic, factory. We do policy recommendations, which are read by decision makers, prime ministers, that leads to policy outcome. And look how clever her thing goes. No, we're not policymakers. We're actually, the core metaphor she's gone is to healers. Our worldview is the medical, and then our recommendation is new medicines. Does that kind of make sense? So this is very clever what that person just did there. From the ivory tower, above knowing more, to what they did in the PRC 40, 50 years ago, the barefoot doctor healing village by village. So I hope you can see those different villages. I hope you can see those different strategies. So again, the futurist role is here's how we're seeing reality. You've suggested different metaphors. That leads to different solution. If in fact the role of the futurist is the healer, then what are your recommendations? It's clearly not just about disembodied foresight. It's putting people through experiences where they, in their body and the collective body, they go through not just a cognitive change, but an emotional embodied response to how reality could be different. Otherwise, in the middle of the transformation process, there's a setback and we give up because life for many is like Sisyphus. Fantastic. And someone said, rather than providing the lead, we support the lead. So this is now going on. OECD becomes the supporter of innovation. So we have 2, 3 different tracks there. The war one, which I think we got some metaphors, we got the worldview, and we got some good data. We didn't get systemic strategies, but that's okay. We can't solve the world's problem in one hour session, nor should we even try. So let me now go back to the presentation, and we'll come back and present that. Oh, mediators, right. So the futurist is a mediator. Dexter is being slightly cynical, the backseat driver, which is fair enough, meaning we're giving noise when no one wants it. So if the backseat driver is not heard, because they create cognitive dissonance. We did a great AI workshop, and the problem today is AI is the driver. We want a world where AI is the passenger and humans design understanding that AI is based on inequity, injustice through algorithms of oppression. If it's a passenger, we lead AI instead of the driver, AI leads us. So you can see the type of thinking here. Peace doer, peacekeeper, mediators. So now we're expanding the role of the futurist as foreteller, as the anticipator, to the healer, to the peacemaker. You're changing the definition to the advisor. Hamza says AI can be the car. Now, this is what futures is good. We came up with one story, and he's already disrupted us. No, AI is the car. And if it's the car, well, then you have to ask yourself, what's a better car? Or what is the car doing? You start to now interrogate the metaphor. Let's go with that. So AI is the car. What's the worldview? AI knows everything, right? What's the system? Then we're designing smart systems that challenge the city. Tiana says, no, we are the highway. Okay, so now everyone's having too much fun here. This is when futures goes amok. People can't stop. And this is what you want to see in a workshop. In this situation where, we're Zooming it and we can't coordinate in a workshop, imagine this for 20, 30 minutes, and you start to have this meta conversation. Is AI the passenger? Who's the highway? Who's the driver? Quickly, what you've done in real time, you've given us 4 different worldviews around AI. Is AI neutral? Is built into AI, are there values? Is AI the solution? Is AI the problem? So you've expanded. So CLA here, I hope you can see it, leads to different scenarios. AI as the passenger, where we're in control. AI is the highway, we're just a product of the highway. We're just getting a free ride. AI here is the infrastructure, the design. And this is the grand debate in the world. Is AI the design, the infrastructure, or AI is the passenger? Based on that, you can start to develop policies, recommendations, and yourself decide where do you want to play. So let me now move to the next part here. I'll go back to my slideshow. Thank you. You can imagine Nemia, who's trying to do this in real time, love and compassion. We're trying to, I'm jumping between 3 different modes of learning. So now I've given you, you've shown in real time the current metaphor of the issue. I'm going to skip this, except to remind you how powerful system is. It's percent invariant. Doesn't matter who you are, seatbelt save your life. If you want to change the system, use worldview to change the rules. The rules define the experience people feel. We look at different worldviews. And the worldviews, here's very tough for some people who live in one worldview. I remember one world leader, he said, our country has no worldviews. So you can imagine the metaphor behind that. I'm being polite by not telling you the country, but they said, we have no worldview. Worldviews are self-referential, you can see by this slide. The part that many brilliant people who are mathematically trained, MBA trained, they actually forget the power of story. So I like to remind this to people who understand system, cybernetics, ecosystems. Remember, in studies on criminology, when they give 2 groups the same data in their community on criminal activities, but they change the metaphor, the policy solution changes with the metaphor. If you say crime is a beast, you'll say put money in catching jail and criminals. If you say crime is a virus, you'll tend to put money in education. Political leaders understand that, thus they attempt to change the national narrative in easy votes of fear. Our goal, those of you who want a post-Darwinian life, is to find narratives that are inclusive, that are transformative, that create the Gaian perspective. I remember with my son, when I asked him 20 years ago when he was young, what's his metaphor of me? He said, Dad, you're an ATM machine. So once you understand people's story of you, your goal is to work with them to transform that story. And now he's really flying successful. And of course, he'd be really embarrassed he was listening to this, so I apologize to him straight away. I'm going to skip this here. I'm going to skip this in terms of, if you know American politics. There's a battle going on about story. Now, this was a very interesting project 7 years ago in Singapore. The narrative was car is king. Do you go straight to strategy? They said no. My colleague Wee Shan Lam very cleverly said no, change the story to everything within reach. If that's your story, then your infrastructure spending is not just roads, it's data. It's not just it becomes access to technology as well. Everyone has to have access. So you quickly move from privilege to equity. You move from cars to transformation. When I work with health, I remember the surgeon said, what's their metaphor? We're the Formula One drivers. And after a day of futures, they said, aha, given the change to peer-to-peer health networks, precision medicine, partnership medicine, we should become the passenger, let the patient drive. So stories change. I'll give you one example, then let's try to do a full CLA. This is a simple one I've done with countries around the world on energy. You can see the litany has changed in their view from the metaphor, keep the lights on, to connect your home and community, to by 2043, choose your own energy adventure. Now, why does that metaphor make sense? Because we're seeing in some countries, it's not just consumers, but we're all customers and producers of energy. So the energy company becomes the connector. It's decentralized and integrated. The energy markets are being disrupted by the problem of abundance as solar systems, other systems become cheaper. So energy companies and nations have to change the story around energy. So this is energy centralization and decentralization. So you have to change your product mix. And I think I like the metaphor. You choose your energy adventure as a producer consumer. So the key is to change the stuckness. There's no solution. Here's how we've always done it. But the world is changing. Here's the data that shows it, to transformation. So now let's go to the new metaphor. Go back to what you wrote. What's the new metaphor of the issue? So those of you who had the OECD one, some of you who had the war one, some of you had the role of policymaking. So you had the current one. What's a better story that gets you in the direction you wish to see, that opens up the door to change? Because that's your role here, right? You wouldn't be doing in futures, is my hypothesis, if you weren't someone who believed, as Pollock said, is an essential optimism. Yes, there's fears and dangers, but you have a value that it can change. Yes, so many people do that, as Joshua fantastically said. They, as you go through it, they disparage others as ideology where they have rational. So once you see that, you ask them always, Joshua, what's your metaphor of ideology? Now they have to speak truth to what they're seeing as unconscious. And once they understand that actually ideology is based on a story and so is rationality, you can start to move them in a different direction. But so there's where you breathe as a facilitator, you become mindful, and you ask them to unpack their own story. I know Ivana did a project in one country where they're looking at public transport, and they weren't, why aren't we funding public transport? And they said, well, actually, because none of us policymakers use public transport. We all have our own cars. And thus the ideology rationally became quite problematic. So they understood why they weren't funding it. So again, unpack it. Someone from the secretary, OECD is a partner for reflection. Peace is possible. Now that's Tiana, that's a strategy. Give me the metaphor behind that. What's the old metaphor? What's the better metaphor? Midwife is not bad. So the futurist, OECD, your own organization, you become the midwife in creating the different future. If you're a midwife, then your skills have to be different. They're content, expert knowledge, but they're also facilitation. And clearly in the midwife narrative, you understand gender relations. There's three changes there. Peacemaker, yeah, that's more. Peacemaker is the new metaphor. And I think you start to look at strategies, peace is possible. What are the strategic changes, Tiana, you would use to make peace possible? Is it changing the nation state? Is it global governance? Is it stopping funding of weapons? Is it creating skill sets among young people to do scenario planning when they're 5 years old, that there's many possible futures, as Golding and Boulding always argue? More scenarios, more possibilities. Fantastic. So we have partnership, we have peacemaker, we had midwife. So we have some really good ones coming up. We have 9 more minutes, so let's do a few more. We're populating it. New metaphor, worldview. So maybe if Joshua can do one on ideology as worldview based on the system of rationality. I just saw Descartes' house, based on his house, Cartesian, the way of thinking. What's the new metaphor in terms of rethinking the rational and rethinking the worldview of ideology? Dexter said new educational tools, that we're going from it's a given to no, peace is a skill set. As we move from a Darwinian to a post-Darwinian, systemically, we need new skill sets. From man is above to Gaia learning, then you have skill sets on peacemaking, conflict resolution, and you teach them at a young age. Just brilliant. You folks, it's great stuff you're doing, and thank you for. Now here, Dexter said, peace is a collective project. It's not just my peace, it's global peace. Tiana says, okay, then you have to change national budgets. Remember, Hazel Henderson said, the only way to do this, instead of going on the evolutionary prerogative of more weapons, there has to be a national global insurance scheme where you pay that group to ensure you're not invaded. Just that we have health insurance that if you get attacked, illness, you're covered. So she suggested a global peace insurance scheme. So if you are attacked, we will cover your costs here. So this is now going on to the project we're talking about. This is a post-Darwinian world, not about survival of the fittest, who has the biggest weapons, but no, we're ensuring all of us, so the weak and vulnerable have equal possibility for thrival as the strong and those who have more weapons. This is now this discussion leads to those possibilities. Marilyn comes in quite cynically and says, well, that's scenario one, the insurance scheme. Scenario two is the global mafia backed by international army. And this is why we do scenarios, right? So she shifted worldviews on us very quickly. The mistake futurists make, then you start to debate her for 2 hours, 6 hours, and everyone gives up. No, that's true. Scenario one is the international insurance scheme that works. Scenario two, yeah, the mafia takes over and develops their own army. So then you figure out what's the better metaphor instead of the mafia, what's the systemic rules you need. So the new litany is peace or reduction in conflicts. That was a great intervention there. So, and then Daniel says there, well, at least limit war. So the goal litany might not be the end of war. The doable litany could be limiting war through the insurance scheme, through changing and teaching conflict resolution skills. I know the mafia thing, I think Maryland's on something. I know when we joke in law enforcement circles, the best futurists are all run by the mafia because they're agile, adaptable, they're responsive, they're doing everything a learning organization does. They miss one part, which I think we can all agree. Before you do the CLA, do a self-check on your ethics. So I think, Marilyn has now gone to the inner CLA. She's Mediterranean. And so fair enough. This is the mindfulness. Here's my lived experience. So future studies, we accept the lived experience of everyone in the room. We never deny it. We meet them where they're at, true and using methods and tools like CLA. Let's go on the journey of transformation. Find the obstacles, find the better stories, find the strategies. Okay, there's a great CLA there. Future, we convince exchange of knowledge from diverse sources. Our systemic convening power and benefits of dialogue, worldview, we are a forum, and metaphor is quite good. 21st century doctor, the healers, the world town square. Now, Daniel says, first is honesty here. Now, when I run CLA workshops, you want to make the space of speaking truth to power. This is not avoiding power. This is understanding how power is linked at all four levels. We do something called the Sarkar game, where we look at doing Sarkar's theory of workers, warriors, intellectuals, capitalists. Where's the power in the room? Which archetypes are active, and how do you transform them? 4 minutes left. I'll take last comments there. People doing the today, tomorrow. So this is what Daniel's suggesting is in CLA, we deconstruct power. So worldview one is power about others. Worldview one is the Buddhist, spiritual, power about myself. Worldview three is power that's shared. So power two can be deconstructed, and as Foucault and others would say, reconstructed. So this is how CLA works, 4 levels across worldviews to find solutions that help in the process of inner and outer transformation. Thanks so much for your time. I hope you found this useful. I really appreciate everyone in the OECD room, colleagues Rafal and others, and I really appreciate you taking the time to spend an hour together. And please hope you can decide, do you prefer icebergs or chocolate cake or Pacific Islands? If you have a better metaphor of CLA of itself, we're very open. As always, it's evolving and changing. Thank you.